much for being here with us today, Georgia. And I have always appreciated all the stuff you are able to share with us in years past and when I've heard you speaking and such on relationships, because that's just one of the foundations of our lives. And unfortunately, when illness comes into it, that affects everything about our lives, including every relationship we have, friendships, relationships with our kids, maybe our adult children, parents, the relationships even sometimes with people at the grocery store who have certain expectations of us and suddenly we need more help and can't walk as well. It's just one of those things that impacts our lives. And it seems like a lot of times those relationships become stressed. And what happens is some of them disappear and there's a lot of miscommunication and hurt feelings and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, we lose some really valuable friendships along the way where we don't have to. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit to start out, just when you think of relationship fallout, relation tips that you could give us about how to avoid having some of those relationships fall, and what some of those challenges are that people face in their relationships every day when they're dealing with a chronic illness.
Well, we need to learn, it's important more than ever when we're dealing with illness, to learn how to express our thoughts and our ideas in a way that we can be heard and that it doesn't create more tension and more confusion in a relationship. And that's far from easy because, here's what happens usually in our relationships. Everybody's under pressure. All kinds of fears and anxieties are stirred up. And when we go from the familiar to the unfamiliar, it's just those insecurities that we just don't know what to say, what to do. And so, again, we react rather than respond. And so if we can help people just learn how to manage those situations, because even if you get to the unfamiliar becoming familiar, you and I both know things are changing all the times when you're dealing with illness, and then it becomes the unfamiliar. So we need to learn how to navigate that terrain in our relationships.
Yes, and sometimes there's people that are in our lives that maybe were a friend in the past before our illness or before it became more serious, and now being around them feels like we always leave feeling more drained than refreshed. We have those feelings of, is this friendship really worth it? Or maybe, she has no idea how much it took for me to get there for lunch, and all she did was complain about her life the whole time and go on and on about how lucky I was to not work. And we might leave feeling just frustrated, exhausted, and some people can even be a little bit nasty and they don't even realize it when they're communicating with us. Is there a time that some of those friendships need to kind of be placed on the back burner or be reconsidered?
Yeah, and if you were like me when I was growing up, I was taught to be kind to everybody, and so many of us have this belief that we have to be nice to everybody, include everybody in our life, and I know I certainly believed that. And there were some key people, one especially when I was going to my cancer treatments. She talked about people dying and these horrible deaths the whole way up to my chemotherapy and the whole way back, in a treatment I never got sick on before. I was sick for days. And so here's what I think people need to remember. We all have bad days. And we all have days we're not always so positive. And emotions are contagious. So whatever that negative person's feeling, you're going to pick it up. And you only have limited resources. You don't have the resources you once had before illness. And so if a person is having a bad day, that's one thing. But what I want to say is when there's somebody who is repeatedly bringing you down, like you said, you go out to lunch and you come home exhausted, pay attention to that. And you have to give yourself permission. If that's repeated and you just are always down after that person, you're going to have to give yourself permission to distance yourself. Minimize your contact with them. One girl said, I expected my mother to understand and be encouraging while I was dealing with all this upheaval, from the illness. And she was discouraging. She was always trying to tell me how she thinks I could fix the situation. And she said it was really hard, but I had to learn to limit my communication with her. So some people we just can't eliminate from our lives. Some people we can. I mean, we just don't talk to them as often. But at the very least, you've got to protect your resources, what you have, because these negative, critical, destructive kind of people steal the valuable resources you have left.
Now, I know that you're not saying just because someone annoys us, you just kind of cut them off. There's obviously, like you said, just as we have bad days, there's other people that have bad days. Is there a way to approach them about it, or does it kind of depend on the relationship or the person? Is there a way you can gently say, you know, this really bothered me. I really would like to be friends with you, but I went home feeling kind of sick to my stomach afterwards, and we need to kind of reevaluate our conversation, you know, subjects or something like that. Is there a way that you could do an in-between there?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a good point. Yeah, and in the case of that friend that day, I said to her at several points in the conversation, I said, can we talk about something else besides cancer? And she did for like 30 seconds. And then she was back on the topic. And you know, repeatedly I did say little things along the way. You know, it's really discouraging to me. And sometimes even the most encouraging stories about cancer. I just didn't want to talk about cancer for, you know, a period of time. And yeah, and you do need to say, you know, can we talk about something besides my illness right now? Or sometimes you might say, you know, I don't need you to fix this. I just want to, I want to vent. Just let me talk it out. Or something. But the more honest, the more transparent we can be without dumping it all on our friends and expecting them, or our family members, expecting them to carry it. But yeah, and I can remember one friend, she had the opposite personality than me. I'm introverted, and so I can't be around people all the time. And she was extroverted, and she would have people call me, and people constantly visit me, and that was too much. And so one day I said, you know, I understand why you're doing this. This is what you would want, but I got to tell you, I want company, I want phone calls, but I want well-spaced. You know, in a perfect world, I realize life isn't perfect. She got deeply offended. She was hurt, and she said, well, if I'm not helping you, then I'll just get out of your life. And we all tend to get defensive at times. And so I gave her the space, you know, to just sort of retreat and lick her wounds. And then we came back to it, and she could understand. And so your point's a very good one. You know, talk about it as honestly as you can, as transparently as you can, express where you are. And some people will accept that and hear that and make adjustments, and some people won't. So even if you do have to, you know, it gets to the point that you do have to distance yourself from somebody, I just want to emphasize, do it respectfully. This is not, you know, blasting somebody and saying some, you know, mean things. This is just doing it with respect and love, but you know, and you might have to speak the truth in love, but do it gently.
Georgia, you do a lot of work with communication styles. You know, all of us, whether we're ill, healthy, or whatever, can use some improvement and some tips on how to communicate better. But when you have a chronic illness, it seems like you're always trying to figure out better ways to communicate. And a lot of us live with, you know, different mood disorders impact our health and vice versa. People will go on and off of new medications, and where they might be a very calm person, suddenly they're bouncing off the walls. So a lot of people with chronic illness have that additional challenge. And so I think it's really good to be very aware of what your communication style is. So even when you're on new medication, you're up at 3 a.m., you know, you don't start blasting off emails and you get up at 10 and realize that was not really your personality, and you did just blast someone disrespectfully. You know, we really need to be aware of what our style of communication is, and then learn how to improve on that. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about communication styles and their value and understanding your own.
Our communication styles correlate directly with our personalities. And so I'll use the personalities of the Lit Towers. And so the one personality is the popular sanguine, and that's the outgoing, fun-loving person whose basic desire is to have fun. If that's you, your style of communication is to think while you're speaking. And sometimes I laugh because sometimes you think before you say something. But you like to think out loud. You like to bounce ideas off of people, and that's the way you communicate. And you're right, Lisa, we need to figure out what is our basic style, own it, but we're going to talk about how to, refine it too. And then the total opposite of the popular sanguine is the perfect melancholy. And this is the detailed, organized, sensitive kind of person. And their communication style is thoughtful and deliberate. Like on Facebook, they're not just going to throw some comment out there. They want to think about it because they want it perfect. Their basic desire isn't for perfection, and so they want to say it perfectly, express it in a way that they don't hurt other people's feelings. And then the powerful choleric is the third personality, and their communication style, if this is you're the natural born leader. Your basic desire is for control. And the way you like to communicate is direct. You're not going to beat around the bush. Direct. You can be blunt, and you get to the point. You don't go on 10,000 rabbit trails. You get right to the point. And then the fourth style is the peaceful phlegmatic. This is the easygoing, relaxed kind of person. And their basic desire is for peace and quiet. The way they like to communicate is they like to ponder. They're a watcher. They'll watch people, they'll watch situations, they'll ponder things, and then they'll speak. For example, my friend is married to a peaceful phlegmatic, and she always says, when I ask him a question, I count to 8 in my mind because it takes him that long. And so if that's you, that's okay. Give yourself that time. Realize you're going to think, you're going to ponder it as you're watching the situation, and then you'll respond. So there are 4 distinct ways of communicating.
I think all of us can relate with one of those. Maybe will immediately come to mind. And I know for those of us that have loved ones around us, especially a spouse, a lot of times you might find that it's the opposite of you. It might be one of the two. And as many times as I hear them, I hear just a new little few words in there that describe it, and I think that was me last night. That was me. So it's always reassuring to know, we are who God made us to be, and the way we respond in certain situations is kind of ingrained in us, and that there is no good or bad communication or personality style. They're just different.
Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes the opposites attract, and then they attack each other and the way they communicate. And the other thing I think we probably should mention is you might not just be one of those styles. You may be a combination of 2. For example, I'm a melancholy choleric. So while I like my communication to be thoughtful and deliberate, I can be pretty blunt and to the point at times. So I can be a combination.
So, to our listeners out there, I would just say, if you can get your hands on Georgia's books and books on those personality styles, they really can be a good foundation for just understanding some of the basic interaction even in your own home. Yeah, because we want people to hear what you say in a way that they're not hurt and wounded. And it's it's not easy by any means. Now, what do you think are some of the highlights that people who live with chronic illness need to know about their communication style in order to not lose these relationships or these friendships? Now, like you said, sometimes it can be really helpful if one person is trying to encourage you, like your friend who is a sanguine. Her way may have been, let's open up the curtains, let's go to a comedy movie, let's get out of the house, where, that may be the opposite of what someone with the opposite personality may need to feel refreshed. That may drain them. So as people are around us trying to fix us, improve us, help us, whatever it is, a lot of times they may be a different personality, and it may be the exact opposite of what we need, even though they're trying to be helpful. So what are some things to be aware of when we're dealing with these friendships and relationships and want to keep them?
Well, yeah, and boy, I'm not going to say this one's easy. It's called navigation, but just first of all, don't take it personally and get wounded and offended and hurt right away, because as you mentioned, they're probably doing for you exactly what they would want you to do for them if they were in a similar circumstance. And they don't always recognize that that's not what you need. So if you can gently skirt around it, sometimes I talk around the issue. For example, that friend, I tried to say, people don't always I don't go directly to her. I just say, people don't always understand that I'm such an introvert. And even if they do get the concept that an introvert's recharged by solitude. Most of the population is an extrovert. And so extroverts really, even though they might have, what do I want to say, an understanding in their head, they don't really get it in the day-to-day what that looks like. And so if you can just sort of say something to the effect, I love company and it's so important to me, but I really need it to be well spaced so that I can rest and renew and recharge in between. And sometimes they'll take that. They'll hear that, they'll hear what you're saying, and they'll run with it. That doesn't work, then like we were talking earlier, you have to take a more direct approach and say, but you've got it for every negative. It's that old story. For every negative, you start out with a positive, and then, and then when you do give that constructive comment, you got to follow it up with 5 more encouraging statements. Because my friend that day only heard of the things she was doing that weren't helping me. And she was working hard, and you got to understand, some people a lot of times are trying so hard to be encouraging. And so any little thing might knock them down, and so we have to be the gentlest of the gentle. Does that answer your question?
It does. When I was recovering from hand surgery, my mom was here helping for 6 weeks. And I basically sent an email to my best friends and said, what I really need is someone to just pick me up and take me for coffee. Just because I couldn't drive. And I just, my mom was here to help with meals. There wasn't a lot of needs, like someone to do laundry or anything. Mom was helping that. But I just wanted to get out of the house and just not be around my mom for an hour, as much as I loved her.
Yeah.
And one of my best friends, she finally came over and got me for coffee at like 9:30 at night. And I'd been in bed with my pajamas on at 7 every night. And I remember my mom saying, you don't really want to go do this, do you? And I said, no, but this is what she can give. She's working around a huge schedule of kids and work and all these things, and she wants to help. And I knew that once I got out of the house, it was only going to be open another half hour, the coffee place. And I would probably feel, mentally it would probably help me to be out of the house with her for a while, even if physically it was draining. And it was one of those balance things where you look at the friendship and what it's worth, and they're trying their hardest. Now, if this was going to be a weekly occurrence, I would have said, this 9:30 thing doesn't really work for me right now. But there's times,
And what I like is, and I hope people pick up on what you just did, you were modeling, you said what you needed. You said, it would be really great. And when you put out there, people have an option. Because sometimes people use the excuse, but I don't know what to do for them. But you put it right out there. What would be great is if I could go for ice cream. What would be great is just for me, I remember many times, I just wanted to get in the car and get out of the house. Mm-hmm. I didn't care if we drove around and looked at the cows in the pasture. I just wanted to get out of the house. But to put that out there, to say that, and then that's their choice, whether they follow through.
If you could just tell us a little bit about, should we start with the melancholy personality, and maybe share with us 3 questions that might be helpful for them to ask to kind of become a little self-aware?
Yeah, and that's what I would say in this communication and learning how to express your ideas, thoughts, and feelings, is we tend as human beings to be self-focused. Me, myself, sort of like I talked to somebody the other day and her hands kept going to herself. And, think of the 2-year-old, me, mine. So we naturally do that. Self-awareness, which was what I want to talk about with the personalities for a minute, that doesn't come naturally. We got to cultivate that. We have to be intentional. So I'm going to give each personality, hopefully you identified yourself, or maybe when we're talking about this further, you'll have more of awareness. And I do have some free resources on my website. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to be intentional to develop self-awareness about your style of communicating, and ask yourself some key questions routinely, because people aren't always going to give you the feedback that maybe you need. But for example, the melancholy, we said they're thoughtful and they're deliberate in their communication style. They like perfection. But in their organization, they can see all the details. They can help people see all the details. But here's one of the questions you have to ask yourself. Maybe you're visiting the doctor. You know, you see the details, but are you sharing too many of the facts and giving too many of the details? And people are lost in whatever is most important. Are you weighing your husband down with all the little things that happened along the way? So continually, if you're a perfect melancholy, ask yourself, am I giving too many facts, too many details, too much of the little stuff that doesn't need to be communicated? And then the other strength is you're gifted planners. But here's what we can do as melancholies. We can take that wonderful plan. See, we think we can straighten everything out. We know the perfect plan, but we can hold it so tightly. We can be totally inflexible. So for that little perfect plan that you have and how you have everything organized, you got to remember to hold it with an open hand and not demand that the people in your life or God himself or your co-workers follow your plan. So here's your plan. You can have those desires. You can have it well organized, but don't hold it so tightly. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing you have to ask yourself, besides am I holding my plans too tightly, is you're very sensitive, very compassionate. You listen with your heart. You can pick up things that are going on underneath the surface, unlike any of the other personalities. But here's the deal. You don't always interpret what you're picking up. You know something's going on. More than once I said, I don't know, to my friends, I know something's going on in your life. I don't know what it is. But we can be so sensitive that we think we know, and we, like, in our own little heads, we have come up what we think's going on. We overanalyze it. Or somebody will make a comment to us and we'll ruminate over it and we'll become hypersensitive. Well, she said such and such, and then we become deeply wounded. So in your communications with others, the question you have to ask yourself is, am I being too sensitive? Am I over-analyzing everything everybody's saying? And are my assumptions that I'm making about what's going on all necessarily correct?
Those are all great questions. And I know as we're going through these different personalities, no matter what our personality is, there's some takeaway from each one.
Yeah, and I'd also want to say is on self-awareness. When you're stressed, here's some things that you're going to see. Pay attention to your behavior, because when melancholies get stressed, they get paralyzed. They literally can't think. It's like their brain shuts down. Mm-hmm. They become so critical and so negative. So if you find yourself just, spewing out one critical comment after the other, take a step back and say, is it time to get some rest? Is it time to eat a good meal? Is it time to watch a movie, read a book? Pay attention, self-awareness. And then the other thing you do is when you're stressed, you drown in all the details and you absolutely lose sight of the big picture. So those are three things you got to pay attention to. And when you see those, you got to be proactive and do something to, renew your depleted resources.
Yeah, and as someone, if I can speak as a wife for a minute, as someone who's married to a melancholy man who I love and adore and is a good husband, but when I'm the one with the chronic illness, it can become very frustrating because they can get caught up in the details of having to go home at 9 o'clock and make coffee and give the kid a bath and read the story, and you're thinking, I'm the one that has to get home and put my foot up with ice. I'm a little worried about this arm that's not moving, and take all those meds and hope that I can move tomorrow. And so it's a perfect storm for problems if you're not both communicating and aware, and there's a lot of resentment and bitterness that can build up really fast.
Well, and that's just it. And getting to that point, yeah, you're both stressed to the max. And maybe, I said, renew and rest. Maybe that isn't even an option at that moment. And so, you got to keep moving. It is a balancing act and an art form to learn to work together and accept what life has handed you, what God's allowed in your life. And some days it's uglier and messier than others.
Yeah, a sense of humor can go a long ways at times. Tell us a little bit, speaking of a sense of humor, tell us a little bit about the Sanguine and what are 3 questions they should maybe ask themselves when in the depth of all of this.
Yeah, the Sanguines, they are that entertaining personality. They love to tell stories. They don't mind making themselves look silly or look like an idiot, They're just, each of the personalities has gifts, and that's the gift of a Sanguine if that's yours. The problem is you have all these great stories, you can entertain others, but sometimes, like when you're talking to the doctor, maybe your husband's tired, you told a story to tell a great story, or does it really fit with what needs to be talked about at this point? Play a little game. Is this the best story, or do I just want to share this story to share a wonderful story? Because there's times that it's appropriate and there's times that it isn't. So you need to be aware of that. The other thing, you're very outgoing and charming. You make people feel comfortable. You pull people in. You have no trouble talking. But are you giving other people a chance to talk? Am I creating space in conversations? What happens when I do make space? Do other people then talk? So that's a huge one for the Sanguine. Are you creating space in conversations? And then you're spontaneous, you're creative. I'm always amazed at the brilliant ideas my Sanguine friends come up with in a split second. It's like, wow, where did you get that? So they have these great ideas, but sometimes your tendency is, as we talked earlier, to think before you speak. And so what you might say maybe might have been best not to be mentioned at all. Mm-hmm. So you need to ask yourself, am I taking time, even if it's a second or two, to filter this through? Am I asking myself when I make this comment, is it going to be hurtful or is it going to be helpful, edifying to the person that I'm sharing it with? I just wanted to say for you, stressor, when you're talking too loud and way too much, sharing, too much information, TMI, the term we use, Sanguines can, share too much. For you, when you're stressed, you get real sarcastic. You make these nice plunging comments and then you say, I was only kidding, or can't you take a joke, but they hurt. And you also have problems, Sanguines, focusing. When you're stressed, your mind is all over the map and you have a terrible time bringing it down and focusing on one thing.
Okay, Georgia, I will self-confess before you say anything that I'm a choleric. I think most people that know me are well aware of that, and I know that one of our gifts or our drawbacks is sometimes being a little blunt. And even just, a week ago, I was sitting there having a conversation with someone about the divorce they were going through, and it was with a couple families, but that's why we were there, and nobody brought it up. And so I finally said, so not to be blunt or anything, but if you'd like to share, we would like to hear what you're going through, and if you'd rather not, that's cool too. It was, my husband said later, you just threw it out there, and I'm like, well, it was kind of the white elephant, and I didn't want him to think nobody cared, like we all got together to talk about it, and then nobody brought it up. So, and to me, those things just feel like a relief. It's not scary, but for someone that's not a cleric, that could be their worst nightmare, and sometimes people will look at me and think, oh my gosh, what have you said? Sometimes that can be a drawback. Not everybody receives that in the right way. So you tell us a little bit about the choleric and even maybe how I might soften some of my bluntness at times.
Well, honestly, I like the way you phrased that because you gave them the opportunity, but at the same time you said, I realize you might not want to talk about it. And so did they take you up on it? I'm thinking they probably did. They probably had a sense of relief.
Completely opened up, and it was a 90-minute conversation. Yeah. And the choleric's good at that. They are not afraid to say the things that everybody else is thinking in the room. I'll ask the questions to the doctor that everybody in the room wants to ask the doctor, but nobody wants to really ask. And so that's a wonderful attribute of the choleric. They're not afraid of those challenges. They're not afraid of conflict. They're not afraid of the difficult communication in any way. And the choleric's basic desires for control. And so when it comes to self-awareness, that's the thing we got to be aware of. We have this gift that we were just talking about, but are we at the point where we're trying to manipulate and control everybody in our life? And that's when it gets dangerous. We're gifted leaders. We can take the lead, but
here's the deal. Sometimes we know what needs to be done and who needs to do it and the way it needs to be done. And sometimes we are right. Many times we might be. I'm a choleric too. So, but here's the deal. Is it the question we need to ask ourselves for self-awareness? Just because I think this is the way we should do it and who should do it, is that necessarily right? Is this my opinion, or is this really the truth? Mm-hmm. And so just because it's our opinion doesn't mean, it's the truth. So put it out there, but don't, drive it home with a hammer necessarily. And, we love challenges. We don't back down from challenges like maybe some of the other personalities. But sometimes we don't know when to back down. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about the seasons. There's a time to search, and there's a time to stop searching, is one of the seasons they're talking about. And I know for me, many times in my illness, I didn't want to stop searching, even when it was probably time to stop searching. I didn't want to let God be in control. It's like I was going to find the perfect doctor or the right solution, and for cholerics, there is some pain there isn't a painkiller. Mm-hmm. And some things can't be fixed. And so you need to ask yourself, am I trying to fix something that doesn't even need to be fixed or can't be fixed? And are you willing to step back and reflect on those things? And then finally, you're focused on goals. You can get more done in a day than any of the other personalities. But here's what happens to many of us cholerics. Finding that right medication, finding that right painkiller, finding that right doctor, psychologist, you name it, does that become more important than the people in your life? Because we can get so focused on a goal, something that we're going to, solve, that we lose sight of the people in our lives. The goals can become more important to us than the people in our lives, and that's very dangerous for us. So self-awareness for a choleric, you've got to be asking yourself. And even though the people in your life might be important, are you communicating that in a way that they hear it and understand? Or do they think that goal and being productive or finding that solution is more important? Now, when you get stressed, you're demanding, you're angry, you're bossy, you're easily irritated, and you have very little tolerance for mistakes. So when you start to see that behavior, okay, self-awareness, time to tone things down.
I think I could probably apply all of those in some respect. On the other hand, it's nice to know I'm not alone. I also think, there's a lot of people I see, it reminded me as you were speaking, when you're searching for the diagnosis and you don't have it yet, cholerics and melancholies is what people like to do a lot of research and everything, seem to be the ones that really struggle during that. Not that, everybody struggles when you're looking for a diagnosis, but a lot of times, like you said, we're a fighter, but we want to know what we're fighting. And, for a personality that likes to do the research and compare and read reviews on everything and the medication, and, both of those can really become, like you said, influential in your life and take over, and you forget the people, and just stepping away from the internet, sometimes you don't have to research everything every minute, read every word that's out there.
And this wasn't chronic illness, but my son had severe developmental disabilities, and years ago, today that he would be diagnosed as Asperger's, but years ago, he's 33 now, they didn't have that. I never got a diagnosis his first 6 years. And if you don't think that was craziness for the choleric melancholy, because it's like you said. So sometimes you got to learn to live with that, and just it's a tough road to haul.
And I also think as a choleric, it can be easy to have a conflict with a doctor who does not want you to be in control. And there are times I've told doctors, with all due respect, you are not doing that procedure until I consult with my regular doctor, and I've had doctors get very upset with me because I had no qualms about stating the facts in a respectful manner, but I let them know it was my body, and no, I was not, and so it's easy to get into it, and setting healthy boundaries and yet also keeping the communication open is a real challenge. I can see that you must relate with that a little bit.
Oh, big time. And yeah, it's like we can even offend the most competent professional doc. The best doctors, we callers, can offend if we're not careful. And even if they make one mistake, because we love competency and we get, frustrated with people who aren't. Yeah, talk about communication. We don't want to offend even the very people who do want to help us and can.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other personality is the phlegmatic. Is that right? Yeah, phlegmatic. And they are known as sometimes the peacemaker, which is a nice person to have around.
Oh, yeah.
What are some things that a phlegmatic maybe should be thinking about before he or she speaks?
Well, the phlegmatics are the easygoing, lay-back, relaxed kind of personality, and their basic desire is for peace and quiet. And if that is your personality, that's wonderful. But you tend to watch. You tend to take in. And so for self-awareness, you got to ask yourself, am I actively engaged? Am I actively interacting with other people? Because many times people are working hard to figure out what you're even thinking. And not every personality wants to ask you what you're thinking. And so realize that and ask yourself, am I actively interacting? Am I communicating with others with words? Or am I tending to withdraw and isolate? And watching is the way you like to, sort of take in interactions around you. But you need to contribute, because realize, people work hard to try to guess what you're thinking. The other thing is you have this wonderful, even, steady, reliable kind of personality, a cooperative spirit. When crisis comes, you're great. You can see what needs to be done and retreat. But that cooperative spirit, many times, you're going to push issues under the rug that maybe should not be pushed under the rug. And so don't necessarily, because you are cooperative, let that be the total the total force. There are some issues that are important that you might have to deal with, and you might have to say some things that maybe other people don't want to hear, and it might create a little conflict, which peaceful phlegmatics don't like. But here's the deal. Short term, it's going to be painful for you. Mm-hmm. Long term, it's going to be very healthy for your relationships. So be willing to do that. And then the other thing is you work well under pressure, and as I said, you're great in crisis. But do you wait for a crisis to get motivated? Do you wait for a crisis to get involved in something? And when you get stressed, you're going to swallow your feelings. You're going to give in. You're going to withdraw, and you're good at putting up walls. And then you become uninvolved and unmotivated. So when you see yourself swallowing everything, pushing everything under the rug, putting up walls, that's time to look at that behavior.
Now, I get a lot of emails online from people with illness that a lot of times I wonder if they might have a phlegmatic personality, because they are the peacemaker and they have bottled it all up, just like you're describing, for sometimes decades. They don't talk about their illness. They don't talk about the pain they go through, their frustrations, their fears. They don't really talk to their spouse about when feelings are hurt. They don't talk to their kids about that's not okay to treat mommy or daddy that way. You need to open the door for me, not slam it in my face. Whatever it is, there's just, like you say, they have swept things under the rug for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's ready to erupt. And at that point, they may be saying, my kids are grown and gone, I'm filing for divorce, I'm done, I'm over. And the spouse is sometimes left thinking, what happened? I never realized you were unhappy. It's another one of those perfect storm environments. And I like that you said it's going to be very painful for a phlegmatic to communicate at first, because it goes against what's normal for them. But it's so worth it. And I wonder if someone recognizes themselves as you're saying this, and maybe even what I say, they say, yeah, that's me. I haven't talked about to my husband or my wife about my illness for 5 years. Some people really don't share much of anything about what they're going through, and they're so alone. what would be a good step, a first step?
And if you've been stuffing it for years and years, you're like a shaking up bottle of soda. If I have a bottle of Coke and I shake it up, I mean, you're just you're right. You're just let the lid open and talk about a mess. You got a big mess. And so how would you deal with that when you're totally been stuffing for years and years? I would say start paying attention and own the fact that you're stuffing. And then second of all, you got to find ways to slowly open that little lid and let out a little bit of the pressure at a time. You're not going to deal with 10 years of emotions or 20 years. And you're right, that's what they do. They don't say anything and then all of a sudden they walk away. They're done, they've had it, the walls have gone up, they're built. And so, yes, seek counseling. Years ago, I had a mess in my garage, and I declared I was going to clean out my garage, and 3 months later, I hadn't done anything. And finally, friends said, start in a closet, start in a corner, start in a shelf, start in a box. I had to start with one item. And so they might need help with a counselor, with a coach, and they got to deal with one thing at a time, one step at a time. And it'll take a while, but if you've been stuffing a long time, you just got to realize up front, long term is going to be healthy for every one of your relationships, and most importantly yourself, because those feelings, they're in there, and they, research has proven they affect our health. Not that just because we have health problems, we are stuffing our emotions. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah, and just a reminder to our viewers here that Georgia is a counselor herself, and she is a life coach. And, I have spoken to a counselor on occasion, and I have had a life coach. There is nothing shameful or embarrassing, or it does not mean you're a failure. I know a lot of people, especially those who have the perfectionist feeling in there, feel like they're, saying they have failed to step into an office and talk about it with someone. And it's not. It's a really healthy tool that you should be thinking of as just part of your toolbox, especially when you're dealing with a chronic illness and have doctors and physical therapists and everything. It's a great person to add to that toolbox.
Yeah, you need a community. And I too, when I was going through all those, I was given a 2% chance to be alive in 10 years and had chemotherapy, radiation, and bone marrow transplant. I too sought the help of a counselor for years. I too, created this community around me where I had not only my friends and my family, but all these professionals in my life. And yeah, we need that support system, and I hear that all the time. Well, I'm so weak, I need help. No, it's actually a sign of strength when you say, I need help.
When we walk in to see a new doctor for the first time and he's got fabulous reviews and we really want to be his patient, and he may have the opposite personality as us, and it comes across the way he's communicating, and you think this is someone I could bump heads with, but maybe his credentials and everything are really what you want. When we're going through these professional relationships as well as our friendships that we want to keep, and this seminar may have brought to light when we looked at our friendships and some of those conflicts we may be having. This may be like a aha kind of moment. That might be why. How do we match them? How do we look at their strengths and weaknesses and our strengths and weaknesses and try to complement each other instead of hitting against each other?
Yeah, we want to tailor our communications. We want to, pick up. We want to be observant and watch. You can pick up pretty quickly, usually what somebody's personality is. If they come in and they have a smile on their face and they're making jokes, or they might tell you a story, think about the sanguine personality. But you want to tailor your communications. So if you have that sanguine doctor or sanguine nurse, share a story. They enjoy that. They love attention and approval. They thrive on that. It's like giving them Miracle-Gro. Some of the personalities, like the choleric, they don't necessarily need you to give them compliments or approve of them, but the sanguine personality does. And so do that. Communicate your acceptance and give them attention. If it's a melancholy physician or nurse, you want to be very sensitive to their feelings and respect their time. Because they, and don't come at them with all this energy. Be gentle, but also they'll want the details. So provide them with the details. They're the ones that want the facts, because they'll know how to process them through. And then that choleric doctor, I can remember my doctor when I got the bone marrow transplant, you could hear her walking down the hall. You know, you could hear her steps. She walked in, she asked a few questions, and she was out the door. So with that personality, I knew whatever I needed to say, whatever was most important, I needed to say it within the first minute. And then if I got more time, fine, but I might not necessarily. So your communication has to be direct and to the point. And you need to give, you know, if you're talking to somebody else in your life, you want to give them choices and options, because remember, they want control. And then the peaceful phlegmatic doctor, this was my oncologist here at home. Nothing ruffled his feathers, real easygoing, and I just had to show him respect for who he was. Not what he accomplished, not his degrees, and so on. But I didn't always know what he was thinking. He didn't always think to say it. And it's like guessing what they're thinking. And so I often, as a patient, had to ask him some questions. Well, what do you think about this? Or what's your feeling? Or whatever. And they don't like conflict and disagreement. So I especially needed to keep it to a minimum with him.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're saying, I believe, is yes, our personality is important. And when we think, well, that's just the way I am, they have to adapt. That's not always the case. We don't get to use it as an excuse. And since we have an understanding, that gives us the opportunity to adapt to their needs. And I know, yeah. I think my rheumatologist is probably melancholy. He likes details, but he also doesn't always have a lot of time. So I've learned, although he wants details and he will ask questions, he gets a little stressed if he's running late. So sometimes I'll email him things in advance. You know, and then I bring my Post-it note with 4 words, you know. And so he has a chance to hear me out, know the details that he wants. And yet when I'm there, I'll pull out my Post-it and he'll kind of smile, and I have him prioritized for time. You know, and he'll say, tell me what's on your list. So it's a new doctor in the last year. And so it's relearning that whole relationship again and figuring out what works for them best to receive your information, and how you can also get out what you need to do and be a good advocate for yourself.
Yeah, everything we've been talking about is a real challenge, but that doesn't mean we back down from it. You know, as human beings, we want to grow no matter what the challenge or obstacles. In fact, these kind of situations provide all kinds of growing opportunities, don't they?
Definitely.
Okay, my website is georgiashaffer.com, and people spell Shaffer incorrectly. Georgia, like the state, Georgia, but Shaffer is S-H, no C, S-H-A, 2 F's, E-R. And I have on that website, when across the top, there's a page called Free Resources. And on that page, I have articles like, handling the difficult times with the different personalities. I have what we've been talking about, understanding your communication style. If you like the questions of developing self-awareness, that's a free resource at georgiashaffer.com. As far as if you want to find more information and delve into these topics deeper, I have several books available on the website, or they're all available on Amazon.com or any of the Barnes & Noble, any of the websites, except A Gift of Morning Glories, my first book that I wrote, and that's about the process of rebuilding after these unwanted changes. And that's only available at my website. But I'd say the #1 book I would recommend first, if you're just dealing with all these issues and the messiness of life, is Taking Out Your Emotional Trash. Because you don't go through this kind of upheaval in your life without, the truth is we all have trash. Mm-hmm. And so the issue is not, do you have emotional trash? The question is, what are you doing with yours? Are you stuffing it like we talked about? Are you dumping it on others? Or are you expressing it in a healthy, productive kind of way? And so that book, I think, would be very helpful. You know, we can't get rid of all the things that are weighing us down, but that book will help you get rid of the things, unnecessary burdens that are weighing you down.
Well, thank you so much. And as you mentioned earlier, you know, we can learn all this stuff, but it's really the relationships of our loved ones that get us through the tough times, the good times, all of that. So yes, it's important to be a good advocate for yourself and your illness, all these things, but if we've got all that emotional trash building up in our lives and we see people falling by the wayside and we think, well, if they can't deal with it, that's their loss. You know, pretty soon we're not going to have anyone left around us, and that's really what we most value in life. So I would encourage all of you to check out the books and her free downloads with questions and articles and flyers. Georgia has a whole ton of stuff. I've known Georgia since way back. When I was first becoming a speaker, she was one of my mentors, and I just love her, and her stuff is really it's very applicable to anyone's life at the moment. Wherever you're at, you can find something you'll grab on and say, this is describing me exactly. How did she know? So thank you so much for being with us today, Georgia. I really appreciate it.
Well, and I appreciate you and what you're doing, because you're giving a voice to all these people who are out there struggling, and these things are just rumbling inside of them. So thank you for giving a voice to people. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.